There is a certain kind of stillness, the kind that arrives only after the world has gone to sleep. It settles over the houses in your neighborhood, blankets the empty streets, hushes the sounds of the day until all that remains is a deep, abiding quiet. This is a time for rest, for dreams, when the soft glow behind a single curtain seems enough to keep the dark at bay. Yet in this deep hush, other things can stir, things that wait for the silence. Listen. The night breathes differently when the last engine fades and the final window darkens. The familiar becomes a little unfamiliar, as if the corners of the world have loosened, as if the rooms you know by heart have grown slightly deeper. In the stillness, the small noises learn to speak. The house settling, wood that remembers footsteps, air moving through unseen seams. It is not a night for screams, nor for sudden frights. No. Tonight we lean into the quiet. We keep our voices low. We listen to the unsettling whispers that hide within the calm, those faint edges of feeling that brush against the mind and then recede. Let the hush sink in. Let it fill the spaces where conversation once lived, where the day once hurried. Feel how the quiet makes the ordinary feel delicate, balanced, and strange. In this slow hour, our senses sharpen. The dark window becomes a mirror. The street, a river of reflected moonlight. The soft tick of time stretches and thins. Find a comfortable place. Dim the lights. Allow the night to be what it is. Cool, patient, watchful. Breathe with it. And as you do, prepare yourself gently for what waits within the silence. Not a shout, but a murmur. Not a leap, but a gradual turning of the unseen toward you. Tonight, we will follow the quiet where it leads. 3 stories meant for a quiet night, told softly from the far edge of the dark. The first sound. Mara lived a life measured in gentle, deliberate beats. The kind of evenings where the world folds itself into a smaller, kinder shape. The glow of a single lamp tamping back the dark at the edges. The quiet geometry of a tidy desk. The soft wash of window black reflecting a face too tired to be anything but honest. Her house, small and suburban and unassuming, felt like a sanctuary because it kept its promises. It made the right kinds of sounds. Clicks from the keyboard, clean, percussive, reassuring. The faint hiss of a kettle, steam threading upward like a thought you can almost hold. The fabric hush of slippers turning in the doorway. These were the fixtures of a life she had chosen. Late emails sent into the digital ether, a chamomile cup warming her fingers, a lamp's halo pooling like honey on the floor. The sound began on a Tuesday. It was faint at first, an almost polite intrusion carried in on the undercurrent of the hour. A soft thud, rounded at the edges, as if something heavy had landed on plush. Not a crack, not a snap, not the sharp language of things breaking, only weight acknowledging a surface. Then a follow-up, a strange, airy scrape, elongated, delicate, nearly intimate, like a slow exhale pulled through a narrow place. Thud. Shh. She stilled, fingers hovering over the keys, listening the way you listen for your own name in a distant room. The house answered with its usual faithful companions. the refrigerator's low hum, a faraway water heater's throat clearing, the tick-tick ceasing of a settling lamp bulb. Nothing else. No footsteps. No doors negotiating with their frames, no wind with opinions. She let out the breath she hadn't noticed she was holding. Old houses make noises, she told herself. Temperature and timber have their private arguments. Pipes shift, joists yawn, plaster remembers. She filed it neatly in the cabinet labeled harmless. She added an extra minute to her tea's steep to reclaim control. She sent one more message she didn't need to send. And when the room returned to its mild equilibrium, she allowed the story to close on that page. It had happened once. It had been small. It had not asked anything of her, only that she notice it, then forget. She complied. The lamp continued to hold the dark at bay. The window continued to be a mirror. The cursor resumed its gentle blink, as patient as a heartbeat. The night, in return, gave her back the quiet she had come to trust, or at least something that wore the quiet's face convincingly enough to pass. The next night, the hour arrived carrying the same small ritual in its pocket. Around 11, when the lamp felt heavier, when the tea went lukewarm and useful, the house performed its quiet duet again. A soft, padded thud, the weight of something that knew how to land without apology. Then the dry, scraping breath, the pulled-through straw of air, the whisper that wasn't quite voice. Thud. Shh. She rose, not dramatically, not with the choreography of fear, just a standing that belonged to long practice. Stretch the back, set the cup down, let the floor remember the shape of bare feet. She walked the circuit of a careful life, hallway, living room, kitchen, trying to meet the sound where it lived. Every window was latched, lever firm in the palm. The curtains hung like disciplined shadows. The vents breathed their low, mechanical lullabies. In the living room, she stopped and listened until listening became the only thing she knew how to do. The house obliged with stillness so complete that it turned the ordinary into evidence. The refrigerator's gentle drone, the thermostat's click as it changed its mind, a car outside sweeping headlights across the wall and then withdrawing as if embarrassed to be caught. Darkness reknit itself behind it. It became an unwelcome nightly ritual, never loud enough to be an alarm, never sharp enough to force a decision. It asked not for panic, but for attention. At the margin of the day where habits loosen, the pattern pressed its seal. Thud, shh, thud, shh. Not aggressive, not random, simply there. She inventoried possibilities like a good steward of reason. Plumbing, no water's rush, no shudder in the lines, the neighbor's dog. The sound lacked the scatter and scrabble of claws. It felt interior, domestic, held within the ribs of the house, air in the ducts. The rhythm was too deliberate, too patient, more measured than machinery, more personal than weather. She mapped it against the floor plan in her mind, a phantom blueprint overlaying memory, the way sound traveled along joists, the way hollow spaces keep secrets. Each night she adjusted her route, shuffled the order of rooms, changed the angle of approach, as if a different choreography might catch it unaware. The house remained a portrait of composure. The noise remained itself. It's the house settling, she reminded herself, an incantation against the rising impulse to name it anything else. Wood exhales, Plaster remembers. Nails speak in small syllables when the temperature asks them to. She repeated this, night after night, until the words became texture rather than meaning. What persisted was the pattern. Around 11. Thud. Then that thin, patient drag of air through a place where air should not have an opinion. She did not fear it, not exactly. Fear demands climax, demands proof. This was something colder, quieter, acceptance that a new line had been added to the script of her evenings, a line that refused to resolve. She returned to her desk each time, to the lamp and the window and the cursor blinking its neutral blink. The night pretended nothing had changed. She almost believed it, but the house had learned her attention, and now every silence carried the shape of the next sound. By afternoon, the house behaved. Sunlight slid across the floors and made a polite geometry of the rooms, and Mara told herself that everything she felt at night was only the mind's way of inventing patterns where none existed. In daylight, logic was a warm blanket. Wood swells and shrinks, plaster shifts, wind finds a seam and hums through it. She recited these reasons like prayers, stacking them in her head until the unease seemed almost embarrassing. She'd open windows, let the air move, set a glass of water on the sill, and watch the surface settle to a perfect, unbroken coin. Nothing stirred. Nothing argued back. And yet, as the light softened toward evening, the rooms changed character. No louder, just closer. She became an investigator in her own home, ear to the wall, first bare, then with the rim of a drinking glass. She listened for hollowness, for a tremor, for the pulse of something mechanical. Knuckles tapped lightly along studs and seams. She walked the baseboards, paused at vents, crouched by the radiator to hear if breath could masquerade as heat. She pictured pipes ticking as they cooled, a foundation easing after the day's fatigue, the ordinary physics of an old place explaining themselves in small, tired voices. She called her father, collected a list of possibilities, air in the lines, a shifting joist, a draft with opinions. She wrote them down on a sticky note and pressed it to the fridge like a talisman. And still, when the sun slid off the last picture frame and the rooms exhaled their brightness, something in the quiet gathered itself. The house did not get noisier, it got precise. The silence felt tuned, as if every molecule in the plaster leaned toward her, waiting for a cue she could not hear but could feel in the delicate bones of her ear. Night answered. The house held its breath, and in that held breath she felt the boundary thin, between ordinary and something else. Then it came, not loud, never loud, but impossibly specific. Thud. A single padded weight settling somewhere deep, as if a heart far below the floor chose one deliberate beat. Shh. A dry, unhurried scrape that could have been air moving through old lungs, or wood remembering a shape it used to be. She froze each time, palms poised above keys or hovering at the light switch, and the quiet around the sound swelled until it seemed to press against her ribs. The silence had density now. It was no longer absence. It was presence, coiled, attentive, aware. She tried to drown it. Sitcom laughter braiding through the living room, music pushed into the corners until dust shook from the rafters. For a while the noise felt like a spell, a crust she could bake over the surface of the evening. But when she turned it off, The dark was heavier for having been asked to wait, and there it was again, patient, punctual. Thud. Shh. She began holding her breath with it. Lungs stalled in a reluctant duet, measuring out the intervals the way you measure the space between lightning and thunder. The explanations on her fridge yellowed into charms that no longer worked. The house was not settling. It was behaving. It felt like an organism that slept through day and in the hush of after midnight rose to a drowsy consciousness. She realized she was not alone in the quiet. Something listened back, and once she knew that, even the intervals without the sound were charged. An empty stage armed with all its lights, waiting for a cue. The silence itself had become the story, and she could not stop turning its pages. A new thought began to take root, quiet at first, almost embarrassed to be heard. What if the sound wasn't drifting down from the attic, nor breathing up from the basement, but pulsing from the very center of the house? She stood at the threshold of the hallway, listening as the night pressed its cool hand against the windows. The silence had a pulse, not loud, not urgent, a patient tide that receded when she moved and returned when she stilled. Her gaze slipped as if guided to the staircase, steps worn to a gentle curve by other feet, other years, the banister, a glossy river of handprints, and beneath it, the small closet, harmless in daylight, a box for brooms and old coats, now a square of shadow inside a larger darkness, a pause in the sentence of the house. She tried to recall the last time she'd opened it for anything other than a glance, the smell of dust and fabric, the soft thistle of sleeves brushing sleeves. Memory answered, but the answer felt thin. The house seemed to be holding its breath with her. Thud. Shh. Not here, not there, but centered, like a heart beating under a palm pressed to wood. She waited for the next night with a resolve that made her stomach flutter. She told herself it was an experiment, the careful test of a rational mind. She would not flood the room with light. She would not speak. She would let the house be what it wanted to be and meet it on its terms. And when the hour came, the familiar quiet settling like snow on the furniture, she rose, bare feet on cool floorboards. The air along the staircase was a degree colder, a draughtless chill that felt like a presence rather than a breeze. Each step closer tuned the sound, not louder but clearer, as if distance were a kind of static being dialed away. She stopped, close enough to see the brass knob glint like a small moon, close enough to notice the shallow scuffs in the wood where the door had kissed the floor over the years. The closet waited. The house listened back. She lifted her hand, held it there, and decided. She opened the door on the exhale, a quiet turn, a careful pull, letting the hinges speak in their thin, tired voice. The small space revealed itself without drama, the lined-up bottles under the shelf, the broom with its bent bristles, the neat row of winter coats, headless, heavy, smelling faintly of old rain and cedar, exactly as she had left it. She stood in the doorway and felt foolish for a heartbeat. But the foolishness passed like a cloud. She did not turn on the light. The dark inside the closet was a gentle thing, textured by the pale wash from the hall, enough to see shapes, not details. Her ears reached out farther than her eyes could. She waited. The house waited. A car far off sighed over wet pavement and was gone. Somewhere a pipe ticked as it cooled. The refrigerator muttered and settled. Silence closed again. Not empty, not blank, but full of attention. Thud. A soft, padded weight, not against the door, not within the coats, but lower, deeper. The floor received it, and something beneath the floor gave a slow, answering breath, a dry, dragging shh that lifted the hairs along her arms. She lowered herself, one hand bracing on the jamb, the other extended into the cool hollow of the closet. The boards were smooth at the threshold, rasped in the middle where boxes must have lived, and there, near the back, a faint ridge where two planks met imperfectly. She pressed her palm flat. The wood pulsed, not with heat, but with a suggestion of space, not a draft, a depth. She leaned closer until the dust near the baseboard resolved into tiny constellations. Her breath became the loudest thing in the room, so she borrowed the house's habit and held it. The sound answered her stillness. Thud. Shh. Certain now. Not in the walls, not in the coats, not in the attic, not in the basement. The source lay under the closet floorboards, in a place her eyes could not find, a place she had never been invited to imagine. A small, impossible room nested inside the house's bones, or a cavity that was not a room at all, but a throat. She pictured against her will a mouth hidden under the wood, patient, breathing, learning the shape of her listening. She withdrew her hand and for the first time since the sound began, felt the boundary of the night give way to a decision. She would come back with a light. She would come back with tools. But in this moment, in this soft and careful dark, she only nodded, acknowledgement, not consent, and eased the door shut, as if tucking the house in. The knob cooled under her fingertips. The quiet refilled the hall, and the floor beneath the closet, unseen, drew one last long, careful breath. The first postcard. Thomas lived inside repetitions that fit like a well-worn coat. 6 a.m. came without fail. Pale light seeping past the blinds, kettle sighing, the neat fold of a shirt cuff. He walked the same route to the mailroom, counting the scuffed squares in the pavement, greeting the same security guard with the same nod. At work, his hands moved with quiet certainty through the paper tide, addresses lined up like coordinates, stamps pressed in tidy rows, each parcel of someone else's life routed to its rightful end. By 5, the light slanted long and familiar. By evening, he settled into a predictable hush. Simple dinner, paperback mystery, television murmuring from a respectful distance. Order was not a cage to him. It was a harbor. On a Wednesday, something small altered the shoreline. A single postcard lay among bills and flyers on his entry table, thick cardstock with a soft, fibrous tooth that caught the evening sun. No return address. He turned it over, expecting a smudge, a clue, the simple logic of a postmark. There was none. The handwriting was compact, careful black loops. The gulls were loud today, it read. Reminded me of that day at the pier. Hope the scar is fading. He looked almost sheepishly at his left wrist, where a thin, pale line slept in the skin. A childhood hook, a story he never told aloud. He set the card on the little tray beside his keys. For a while he watched dust float through the window light and settle on the edges of the message, as if the room were quietly accepting it. A week later, another card, a sun-bleached road, heat wavering toward mountains. The same hand. The heat is something else. Saw Roadrunner. You always loved those cartoons. The specificity pried at him. He could explain the first with chance, the second with an unkind prank, but the absence of a postmark nagged like a loose thread only he could feel. The system he trusted printed time and place onto everything that passed through it. These had slipped through untouched. He found himself lingering at the door each night, listening to the quiet as though it might clear its throat and announce itself. Curiosity, soft at the edges, began to occupy the space where certainty used to live. He brought the cards to work, to the bright, ordinary desk where mysteries were supposed to dissolve. Under the lamp, he tilted them, searching for impressions in the fibers, the faint blister of a missing stamp, any bruise of machinery. The space where a stamp should live was blank and strangely confident, like a door that had never needed a lock. A quick search turned up the publisher's name, defunct since the 1970s. Objects from another decade had arrived without a path. For 2 weeks after that, the mail went boring again. Routine resumed its steady tide, but its sound had changed. Silence now rang a little, as if something had been set humming out of sight. He checked the hallway when he came home, glanced at the threshold. Nothing. Until one rainy evening he pushed the door open and saw a single folded sheet waiting on the floor like a decision. The paper was the same creamy stock, but the message was typed. Letters a little uneven, some striking harder, as if the machine had its own temperament. It described the window of a warm cafe and rain tracking down the glass, the smell of coffee, the quiet murmur of strangers. Then the last line. You were thinking about your mother today. You do that whenever it rains this hard. The truth of it landed with a softness that hurt. He opened the door wide. The hallway was empty, breathing its recycled air. No footsteps, no echo of a retreat. He walked the perimeter of his apartment, touching frames and latches, as if he could make the walls more solid by insisting they were. But the room had changed. The tidy surfaces now felt exposed, the windows like careful eyes. Even the television's polite chatter sounded like it was covering something instead of filling the quiet. He set the paper on the entry table beside the postcards and watched the light crawl across all three, as if time were trying to make them ordinary by degrees. It didn't work. The safe geometry of his life had found a seam. He could feel it when the kettle exhaled, when the elevator down the hall sighed, in the small gap beneath his door, where a thin line of light pooled. He understood, with the reluctant clarity of a man who sorts the world for a living, that someone or something was routing messages directly to him, bypassing the system he trusted. And he knew, as surely as he knew his route to work, that this performance had not ended. It had just learned his address. A seam in the city. Lena was a creature of the night, but not in the way of stories. Her kingdom was a stacks-lined silence, the university library after hours, where paper sighed when pages turned, and the clock measured out the dark in patient clicks. She moved through that hush like a caretaker in a cathedral, locking one heavy oak door after another, breathing in the dust-sweet perfume of old ink. When the last lamp dimmed, the city outside belonged to her. In those slim hours before dawn, she took the same slow walk home, a ritual unwinding. The streets were a low murmur of sleeping infrastructure, vents whispering, traffic lights blinking to no one, steam curling from grates as if the earth exhaled. She loved the predictability, the third-floor window that was always left on. The way her steps came back to her from the stone like a soft echo with a heartbeat. The sidewalk cracks traced a map she knew better than her own lines of life. But tonight, something in that map was wrong. The familiar run of brick faltered. Between two buildings that should have met cleanly, there was a slice, the neatest imperfection she'd ever seen. Not an alley, a seam, too narrow, too exact. It swallowed light instead of holding it, the gap the color of impossible. She stopped. Air cooled as if the street were holding its breath. She reached out, remembering how last week her palm met rough, certain brick, how certainty had texture. Now her fingers hovered over absence and felt a temperature, a faint draft like fog waiting just inside a door. Lena stepped closer. The city's hum thinned. The purple pre-dawn pressed on the roofs like a bruise. She slid into the seam and the world went soft, as if someone had closed a lid over the noise. Silence arrived, not with a bang, but with a careful hand, lifting the sound away and leaving her alone with her own breath. The seam opened into a courtyard that should not exist, tucked like a hidden pocket between buildings that insisted they were back to back. In its center, an Art Deco theater waited in elegant disrepair. Curves and chrome dulled by time, doors heavy with brass that yielded under her hand. Inside, dust held the air together. Rows of red velvet seats faced a vacant screen. And at the back, a projector glowed, a single unblinking eye. Its soft whir stitched a heartbeat into the silence. The beam cut a cone through drifting motes, galaxies rising and falling in its path. On the screen, not a film, but static. Grain that looked like snow learning to remember. Black and white churned and braided into almost images that shied away the moment they formed. She sat, not sure why, letting the velvet cool her skin. The noise calmed her. The noise that was not quite noise. Minutes smeared. Time frayed at the edges like spliced celluloid. When she finally checked her watch, panic tugged at her ribs. Nearly 2 hours had slipped away. Outside, the sky would be turning that particular bruised purple that belongs to mornings you were never meant to see from the wrong side. And yet she returned, the next night, and the next. The projector's hum became a tide, and she let herself float. The static learned to speak in brief flashes, a child pumping a swing towards an endless July, a kitchen argument brittle with gesture and shadow, an old man feeding pigeons in a park she did not recognize. Little lives winked into clarity, then back into snow. The alley made a ritual out of her ritual, demanding nothing but attention, and she gave it freely. Hours went missing in clean, precise bites. She carried daylight through her days like a book with too many pages torn out, not sure where the story had gone thin. One night, the static gathered itself and found her. The screen stopped showing strangers and turned its lens inward. Scenes unspooled in ghostly monochrome. First day of school nerves in a too big sweater. A breakup that had once cracked something essential. A quiet, page-warm afternoon when the sun gilded the edges of a poem. The projector did not judge. It recorded. It replayed. But the next morning when she reached for those memories, they were thinner, like photographs left too long in a window. The color had drained. The feeling had faded to a tasteful grayscale. She stayed away for 3 days, clutching her hours to her chest like contraband. On the 4th, an envelope lay on her doormat. Inside, a glossy photograph of herself taken last night, staring out of her apartment window at a city that did not look back. Privacy felt like a story she had told herself. Back at the silo, the screen split and offered futures in parallel. In one, a sun-scoured beach and a hand in hers, the face a shadow just bright enough to suggest a smile. In the other, the library's corridors, faithful and narrow, stretching on until even the dust grew old. It looked like choice, but Lena felt the shape of the real transaction. The theater did not want money, it wanted presence. It ate attention and was paid in time. Every frame it gave, it kept a part of her. She stood, turned from the flicker, walked the aisle, each step loosening a thread she hadn't known was tied. The door gave way to the city's hum, rushing back like surf. On the sidewalk, under a sky just beginning to lift its color, she slid a hand into her coat pocket and felt paper. She uncurled her fingers to a small, torn stub. The silo, admit 1. The date, crisp in fresh ink, was tomorrow. Bittersweet resolve settled over her like a coat against cold. Some doors once found, never forget your name. The night is deep once more, and we return to the quiet that first gathered around us. But it is not the same quiet we knew at the beginning. It is heavier now, more intricate, as if woven from the threads of 3 lives that brushed against the dark and found it listening back. In Mara's house, the silence learned a rhythm. Thud. Shh. A breath caught in the beams and bones, the suggestion that shelter can feel like a living thing when the world goes still. In Thomas's hallway, the quiet slipped under a door and left a sentence where no stamp belonged, reminding him that routines only look solid until a whisper remembers who you are. And in Lena's alley, the hush became a theater, a white screen of possibility that gave back what it took away, one flicker at a time, until the difference between witness and offering grew thin. These are not stories of screams and doors slamming shut. They are about the way quiet holds shape, the way it waits for you to notice that your breath has matched its pace. They ask small questions that echo into large rooms. What does your home keep when you are not listening? Which messages arrive without a mark and still find you? Which rooms of memory are lit only when you look away? Perhaps tonight you will hear your own house exhale. Perhaps a sentence will arrive in your mind that feels delivered, though you cannot say from where. Perhaps a screen will glow behind your eyelids, and some long-forgotten moment will drift up in a grainy wash, ask to be watched, and then ask to be let go. There is a stillness that soothes, and there is a stillness that invites you closer. If you lean in, do so gently. Let the quiet speak first. Sit with the hum between things, the clock that is not ticking, the lamp that does not flicker, the window that frames only darkness. Give the night a long moment to answer you in its own language, and when the echoes arrive, do not chase them. Let them settle where they wish. The stories have ended, but their silence continues, patient, attentive, unafraid. Leave a space for it. Breathe once and then once more. The night is yours. Sleep well.